Hi all, today we're going to talk about amines. Amines are functional groups that their structure contain nitrogen. You see that here? Nitrogen. This nitrogen can be bonded only one to one carbon, which will give us primary amine, like in alcohols we had primary alcohol. Also, the nitrogen in amines can be connected to carbon, which gives us secondary amine. And in tertiary amines, nitrogen is attached to three carbon. In aliphatic amines, all carbons bonded to nitrogen are derived of alkyl groups. And you can see these are aliphatic amines. In aromatic amine, you can see that you have benzene group attached to the amine. Here, heterocyclic amines. Hetero means that you have other than carbon another element inside the ring. We call it heterocyclic amine. Here you can see we have nitrogen part of the ring, right? When we have a nitrogen or another element like oxygen, we see usually also oxygen part of the ring, in other compounds, we call it heterocyclic. Here also, because nitrogen is part of the ring, we call it heterocyclic amine. Also, we have heterocyclic aliphatic amine, which you see in the first two in the left are heterocyclic aliphatic amine, and we have heterocyclic aromatic amine, which are the last four in the right side. I recommend you to memorize these compounds names. That would be really helpful. If there is any uh, bonding attached to these as a attachment, you can basically start naming from the carbon, start numbering from the carbon attached to the amine closest to amine, and you reach the chain sooner or reach the branch sooner, and you're gonna name it based on that if there is any attachment on these structures. Make sure that when you want to number, don't start numbering from nitrogen. We should always number the carbon, okay? Nitrogen, oxygen are never gonna be part of the longest chain of carbon, because if you remember, we name it longest chain of carbon, okay? So no other element should be part of the longest chain of carbon, okay? Only carbon is in the longest chain. You will see more about it. How you name the amines is basically the same as alcohol, guys. How we name the alcohols. If you see, I had primary, secondary, and tertiary amines, right? So, and also based on the alcohols, also we had primary, secondary, and tertiary alcohols. Also, the naming of amines is the same as alcohols. What we did for alcohols, guys? Find the longest chain of carbon that should include the alcohol in it, or OH in part of attachment to the carbon, and we should start numbering from the side that we reach the OH sooner, right? Is completely the same, guys, except we have here an H or nitrogen instead of the OH. Here we have longest chain, which here we have three carbon, right? So that's my longest chain of carbon. So you can see here that that's the longest chain of carbon. So it's gonna be on carbon 2, doesn't matter from which side I start, right? It's gonna be 1, 2. On carbon 2, I have an amine group, right? So it's gonna be 2 propan amine. So amine name is gonna come in the end. So you should drop the E from the end of propan here, or propane here, E, and then you add amine. It's gonna be 2 propan amine. On carbon 2, I have NH2. Whenever you have a cyclo, the same, you should also put the cyclo, how many carbon you have in it. Here is 6, it's gonna be cyclohexanamine. You should end with amine. What about if you have 2 NH2 or 2 nitrogen in the longest chain of carbon? First, find the longest chain of carbon and count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's gonna be on carbon 1, on carbon 6, I have 2 NH2. It's gonna be 1, 6 hexane diamine. It means I have 2 amine diamine in this compound. Uh, this is kind of the same that we talked about in aromatic. So that's aniline. Here we have 4 nitroaniline or peronitroaniline. Here is 3 methyl or metatoloidine. If you have, as I said, a methyl group or even ethyl group on the as a branch on nitrogen and is not the longest chain, is gonna be an methyl aniline. Of course, in here, because my benzene or my aniline is a root, is gonna be an methyl aniline. In here, we have 2 methyl group on nitrogen. It's gonna be NN dimethyl, 2 methyl group on directly on nitrogen, cyclopentanamine. Also, we can talk about the common names. I will tell you why I talk about the common names. We use this common naming to name the salts of the amines. Okay, here we have, whenever you want to name the amines, you're gonna see what's the aliphatic amine attached to it. So here we have only one aliphatic amine attached to this amine, right? So it's gonna be propyl, it's gonna be alkyl. We call it as alkyl group, it's 3 carbon, it's gonna be propyl amine. Here we have a sec butyl amine. Here I have, make sure we go based on the alphabetical order. If you have more than one branch, it's gonna be diethyl. We go based on the E, we don't go based on D, because D is part of just 2. It just says you have 2 of them, but this E, it should be compared with M. So E is sooner than M. So it's gonna be diethyl methyl amine. So you're gonna just call the branches based on the alphabetic order and end with amine. That's the common naming. Here we have cyclohexyl amine. That's the common naming. How we name amine salts? Amine salts is whenever we have positive and negative inside the compound and we have a nitrogen in the compound. Do you remember ionic compounds? That, for example, here, which is most closer to what we have, is ammonium chloride. So here I showed the plus and minus, and you see that compared to what we have in amine salts, you have, instead of the 3 hydrogen, you have 3 ethyl group. Look very closely. So we have nitrogen here, right? Nitrogen here, chlorine here, negative charge on chlorine, positive charge on the ammonium part, which is nitrogen and hydrogen. And instead of hydrogen, we have ethyl group. Look at here, there is a 3 as a subscript of outside of parentheses, right? So it means I have 3 ethyl group. So instead of 3 hydrogens in ammonium chloride, I have 3 ethyl group, and I have 1 hydrogen left. Whenever you want to name this salt, this is a salt because it's ionic compound. Ionic compounds are always salts. And you can see that we name it based on the common naming. We see how many branches are attached to amine. So it's 3 ethyl, right? It's going to be based on the common name. We just call the alkyl groups. I have 3 alkyl group of ethyl. It's going to be triethyl ammonium chloride. We just borrow name from this ammonium chloride. Triethyl ammonium chloride. What about, do you think, if I had 3-methyl instead of 3-ethyl? It was trimethyl ammonium chloride, right? So make sure use for naming the amine salts, use the common name of the amines. Let's talk about amides. The functional group of an amide is a carbonyl group. You see the carbonyl group here, C double bond O, bonded to a nitrogen atom. When you see this, it's going to be amide functional group. Let's name amide. To name amide, you find the longest chain of carbon that contains carbonyl group. So let's try this amide because I have a carbonyl group and I have nitrogen attached to it directly. So when I want to number, I should go from the carbonyl to the left, because if I go from carbonyl to the right, I reach nitrogen. If you remember, when we were finding the longest chain of carbon, it should all include carbon. So we should not go to the right because we reach nitrogen. We go to the left, so it's going to be 2 carbon in the longest chain. Make sure always start numbering from carbonyl group when you want to number the amide. Start with carbonyl group always. So it's going to be 1, 2. When we have a 2 carbon in the longest chain, it's going to be et, right? So it's going to be ethane, and we end with amide. We have ethanamide. Then here we're gonna have again 2 carbon in the longest chain. 2 carbon, we start numbering from carbonyl group 1, 2, 1, 2, and then whenever there is a alkyl group attached to nitrogen in the other side, so one side is always attached to carbonyl group. The other side, if we have the alkyl group, we should write it as an attachment. For example, here it's going to be N-methyl. There's an alkyl group attached to the nitrogen. Methyl ethanamide. What about this one, guys? What's the longest chain? This is 1 carbon only. That's the simplest. That's basically, here we have an amide, it's only 1 carbon in the longest chain, but we have 2 methyl groups attached to nitrogen. So we should emphasize on them. NN, dimethyl, dimethyl methanamide, methanamide. So we're gonna end with amide. Whenever we have a cyclo, which is in the cyclo, we have a carbonyl group, and directly there is a nitrogen attached to it, we have an amide, right? Functional group here. So these structures are called lactam. Lactams are usually found in antibiotics structures. You do not need, guys, to emphasize on the number on the carbon of carbonyl. Here, for example, you do not need to put one ethanamide because we already know that always we start with the carbon of carbonyl when numbering amides. Let's name the following compounds. Here we have an amine. Find the longest chain for carbon, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Make sure amine group is not part of the longest chain of carbon, right? Because it's not carbon. So here, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's gonna be butanamine. What about this one? The longest chain. From which side I reach sooner? 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 is the same. So I start from the right side. Why? Because I reach the branch sooner. 1, 2, 3. So it's gonna be 2-methyl, 3-pentanamine. On carbon 3, I have a amine. So I should emphasize on it. 3-pentanamine. What about this one? There is a methyl group on nitrogen directly. So it should be N-methyl. So it's going to be N-methyl on carbon, on N, sorry. On N, I have a methyl group. So it's going to be N-methyl cyclohexanamine. N-methyl cyclohexanamine. What about this one? Here, find the longest chain. 1, 2, 3. This is not, guys, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is not the longest chain. Why? Because nitrogen cannot be part of the longest chain of carbon. So here we have a break here. We cannot, because here there is a carbon, there is no carbon, there is carbon. Just put all of them as the longest chain. This is the longest chain of carbon because this is not the carbon. If this one was carbon, the whole was longest chain of carbon. But when nitrogen is here, this would be only the longest chain of carbon. So it's gonna be 1, 2, 3. So it's going to be NON. There are two methyl group on nitrogen. NON dimethyl 2, again methyl on carbon 2. I have a methyl group, 2-methyl, 1, 2, 3 propanamine. This one, what is, we just saw it in previous slides. This is pyridine. What about this one? That's 2-methyl on nitrogen. That's NON, dimethyl cyclopentanamine. Cyclopentanamine. This one is, we find the longest chain, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 1. It means on carbon when I have 2-methyl. 1, dimethyl ethanamine. What about, guys, if I have amine and carbonyl or here ketone? What about if I have amine and ketone in here? Which one is a prior? Let's see. Here I have ketone. Here I have amine here. Which one is prior? Ketone. So my parent name should be ketone. So it's gonna be, find the longest chain. no amine group in it. So it's gonna be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we start from the left side, our bottom here, left side, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Why I start from bottom left? Because I reach the carbonyl group sooner. Because it's prior, I should start from the carbon which is closest to it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's gonna be 6 amino whenever we have amine as a branch. We gonna, our prefix is gonna be amino. It's going to be 6 amino on carbon 2. I have a on, right? 2 hexanone, and there is 6 carbon there. That's it, guys, for this concept. Here we have amide, that's the carbonyl group directly attached to nitrogen. So I'm going to find the longest chain. Here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Should I start here, longest chain? Should I include this one here as a longest chain? No, because nitrogen is not a carbon. So this is not part of the longest chain. So we start numbering from the carbonyl group, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So it's going to be N-ethyl, N-methyl. We go alphabetically down when we want to talk about it. N-ethyl, N-methyl. Because it's 4 carbon inside the longest chain, it's going to be butanamide. Butanamide. So let's do this one, guys. Here, the longest chain is this one. We have carbonyl group. We have nitrogen. So this is amide. Then we start numbering from carbonyl group. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So our longest chain has 6 group, 6 carbon. And then we say, okay, I have a methyl on the nitrogen. That's the N-methyl. I have a methyl group on carbon 2. I have an amino group on carbon 3. So because amide group is more prior, if you remember about the priority table, amide is prior to amine group. So we're gonna go, the parent name goes based on amide name. So it's gonna be 3 amino on carbon 3. I have an amino group. It is gonna be used as a prefix here. 3 amino, 2 methyl. We go right down alphabetically. And methyl hexanamide. Hexanamide. Because I have 6 carbon in the longest chain. Let's do this one, guys. This is amide, right? We have a carbonyl group and we have a nitrogen directly attached to it. So it's gonna be the longest chain from carbonyl group. Start numbering from carbonyl group. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We'll find the longest chain of carbon and we start writing down the branches and the methyl groups and ethyl group that is attached to nitrogen alphabetically. So it's gonna be on carbon 3, I have an ethyl group, 3 ethyl, N-ethyl, N-methyl hexanamide. Pay attention, guys. This is not amine, right? This is not amine. In amine functional group, there is no carbonyl group. It's only nitrogen in amine functional group. This one is amide. Amide has carbonyl group with nitrogen directly attached to it. Here we have an amide functional group. we have a carbonyl directly attached to nitrogen. Pay attention, guys, that doesn't matter nitrogen is in the right side or in the left side. As long as you have a carbonyl group and N, you have an amide functional group. Here we start numbering from carbonyl group. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So our longest chain includes 8 carbon, which is oct, right? So then we write down the branches alphabetically. It's gonna be on carbon to ethyl group, to ethyl, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 7, trimethyl, N dimethyl octanamide. We write them down, guys, alphabetically. The branches should be written down alphabetically. Let's do these two. These are aromatic compounds. This one, this would be our longest chain of the carbonyl group, and this benzene ring. Whenever we have this structure, we call it benzonamide. Benzonamide is when we have this structure, we call it benzamide. So we have NN dimethyl benzamide. In here, that would be our longest chain of carbon. So you can see that benzene group is the part of the branch that is attached to nitrogen. So we should say N-phenyl in N, which is, there is a phenyl group which is attached to nitrogen. N-phenyl ethanamide.